So Jupiter exaggerates. Mars exaggerates by forcing issues. Jupiter expands and says, this is the philosophy, this is the overview, this is the way things are going, I can see the overview. So when Mercury conjuncts, squares, or opposes Jupiter, there's a tendency to exaggerate and tell stories for effect. With Mars to Mercury, there's a tendency to tell stories for effect. But Jupiter really exaggerates. So there's a tendency to think you're philosophical and think your philosophical ideas are valid, and think your perceptions of the whole world are the way it is, which is usually kind of narrow-minded, really. But there's a tendency to talk too much, speak too much, think too much, be too restless, to be, if you're worrying too much, to lose a sharpness of coordination. And understandings and misunderstandings, the stressful aspects, can then impinge on your alertness of the moment. You get pulled into thinking, why is that person thinking like that? Why are they thinking like that? Instead of just maintaining what's right for yourself. So who's your teacher? Who do you understand? How do you assimilate your experiences? So Mercury to Jupiter will usually think it's assimilating experiences before it's really done so. So if you're a speculator, you can speculate and invest, and this is going here, I can see where it's going, we can do this, but there's a tendency to exaggerate. So you wouldn't necessarily want someone who exaggerates with the Mercury to be your investor. Now, some people may have it, and they have it countered, and they know how to use it, and it can, there's still, even if there's a stressful aspect, you're still trying to use Mercury in the sign and the house it's in as best as you can, overcoming the aspect. It's just going to take more effort if there's a stressful aspect. If it, yeah, so you're working with each planet in the sign it says, and every time you go with one planet, it's going to stress the other planet, and this is just going to be, if you have it, it's normal for you. Other people are weird because they're not the same way. But this tendency to know everything, to think too much, to exaggerate too much, it impairs your alertness in the moment. I see where that's going. Oh, they're always like this, or this is where it's going, or it can impinge on the real assimilation of what's right and wrong in what you're doing. Does the end justify the means? Well, the mind will say one thing, Jupiter will say another. So the main key is, I'm not trying to tell you this to define it. I'm trying to just get it so you see the process of making the associations and feel comfortable with it, so you can make the associations yourself, or you're stretching it. And as the better you know each planet, the more you come to know each of the planets and understand their levels, the better you're able to make these associations at whatever levels needed at a certain time when you need it. So okay, so this Mercury Jupiter exaggerates outer situations and the interpretation out of it, and often can create misunderstandings, and you can say things you wish you hadn't, then you have to come and undo it, like say you're sorry for it, like these outer adjustments. So if a kid's thinking one way and the teacher's thinking they got to be differently, some kids adjust, some kids don't. Okay, but Jupiter, because it's an expansive, it expands the ideas out of oneself. So you start thinking, oh, look at this, oh, look at this, oh, look at this system, look at these things going on, and you get pulled out into them so far that you can forget to be alert about the personal things going on around you. I mean, as soon as you start thinking experiences, you start getting into the planets and the houses, and you start seeing more specifically how they tend to work and the attitudes coming in. So these things keep adding on top of the aspect. When you're looking at simply, you just want to see the simple association between the mind and the principles. You know, some people have Mercury, Jupiter, and they're preaching to everybody way more than they should. They're preaching even if they're wrong. Okay, so that's its own puzzle. When you get to Saturn, Saturn's a restrictive, serious mode. Saturn to Mercury isn't going to exaggerate. I don't want to be exaggerated. I don't want to be wrong. It's going to be defensive. It's going to be cautious. So when you have a stressful conjunction square opposition to Saturn from Mercury, the Saturn influences the Mercury. The Mercury doesn't influence the Saturn. The Jupiter and the Mars influence the Mercury. It's not the other way around. Okay, it's the outer planets dump on the inner ones. So it's kind of like the father hits the boy, who hits his younger brother, who kicks the dog. You know, like it goes down like that. The dog isn't hitting the father. It's comes down the chain. The slower moving planets have the effect that throw into affecting the inside. We see the personal connections inside ourselves in our Mercury, Venus, Moon, and we're responding to these outer things. Sometimes it works great and we're responding great. Sometimes when it's not working, we're really struggling to try and figure out why. So Saturn crystallizes, it restricts. It makes the cautious mind, not the expansive mind, not the philosophical mind, not the open mind. It creates the cautious, defensive, bureaucratic, structured mind, the strategic mind, the thinker, the planner. So if you have Saturn and Mercury, there's a tendency, the minute you're going to think or try and be alert to moment, to get serious and have a worry about something. Uh-oh, this could go wrong, or this could go wrong, to have the depressed or restrained thinking. So not communicating, not saying what one's thinking, being defensive, being a little inhibited one's communications or expression will come from that. So if you're trying to talk to someone, if you have a Mercury Mars and you're trying to talk to someone that has a Mercury Saturn, you're going to be talking, the Mercury Mars is going to be talking all the time, and the Mercury Saturn is going to be sitting listening and responding, but not going to be quick to response, because as soon as they put something out, the Mars will attack it. The Mercury Mars will attack it. And then so then the Mercury Saturn will, its defense is to be quiet and say nothing. Then the Mercury Mars gets frustrated. But this is the way these are sort of normal things we run into. They run into these daily. You know, we run into different ways of thinking all the time. Different people post what's real for one person, not real for another. To a coach relating to one of its players, the quick coordination, the quick sense and acting on things, extra aggression can be channeled. That's great. They'll try and impose the discipline. But to someone who's not aggressive and is often your father doesn't talk to you, like there's a serious thinking to your father even from Saturn. When it comes to discipline, oh geez, I have to do this. Oh, I'm going to have to do this. So there's a tendency to think formally. I better get the degree. I better take this job, or I better do this. I have to put up with these authorities. And you're thinking about the responsibility, commitments, and time demands around you. So if they're all around you, you're going to perhaps be more weighted down and depressed, or really serious and ambitious. I'm planning this. I got to plan this, and strategic. But it's not a spontaneous Mercury flow. It's a defensive one. So for each of these aspects, you're going to have to run into people and run into 4 or 5 different people who have this in different ways, and yet you begin to see, look how that's showing. Look how they're living that. Look how they're expressing that. So you've got to look at the 5 or 10 people's charts you have that you know, so that you know well, so you can see this inhibition or strategy or caution around the Mercury. And then you look at other people who don't have it, and you'll see the difference. It has to be experientially seen. It can't rationally do it. I'm just going through making these associations so they can be as real as possible. And as soon as I spend a couple of minutes on it, I feel, geez, I should spend an hour on it. But I can't. I'm just having to start initially on it. We'll be spending, like the 4th level class is all just the aspects of going into this in really great detail, like we did with the moon. But for now, the Saturn restricts, crystallizes, and makes cautious thinking, makes defensive thinking. So you're not going to have a person that's curious or explorative. You're going to have someone that's more defensive and listening and trying to be more structured in their thinking. Now how it affects will be very different. A person can have parents that don't talk to them, or parents are always bossing them, but that's going to be there. Or they can be just totally always responsible and always listening. So the good thing of Saturn Mercury is listening. Mercury, Jupiter, and Mercury, Mars don't listen. Mercury, Saturn, wait a second. Okay, so it's not entirely bad. It's just a certain type of stress. Even then, just by being Saturn in the sign is this, and you're trying to work with it, and Mercury in the sign in the house, and you're trying to work with it, you make it better. You're working to make them both better, make them both better. And even though you're making each one that gets a little bit better, it's still going to have this. They're still going to have the stress between them at low levels or at high levels. So it's a moving, fluctuating matrix looking at this. But up to Saturn, it's kind of normal factors. People can be cautious, no big deal. People can be exaggerating, no big deal. People can be arguing, no big deal. It's more or less dealable in the common run of things. Moon to Saturn, normal life. When we get to the outer planets, we get extreme situations coming in. And they can have very extreme effects on the Mercury, on any of the inner planets. But the outer planets really affect the most inner planets most dramatically. And usually, it's not the best of influences. So Uranus, the planet of excitement, when it's conjunct, square, or opposed to Mercury, it's going to make that Mercury really hyper, almost anxious, but hyper restless, really fast, quick, want to go fast, worry about things fast, think on things fast, but so fast there's not necessarily much of time to absorb or to get consistency or to get credibility for that thinking. Sometimes the Mercury-Uranus conjunction can be interpreted more positively than negative, but it still will have this excitableness, this restlessness, this need to look at things differently. But its energy is high-strung and catalytic. So a catalytic influence affecting the Mercury means you're thinking about catalytic things, of things that change. It's not staying this way, it's not staying that way, it's always changing, it's not going to be stable. So why just stay in school? I got to get in there, I'm going to do something different. That's not working. It diminishes the patience. It certainly cuts in on the ability, the outer planets always affect, they try and bypass the Saturn, which is the ability to listen and be alert. So Uranus creates excitement, and even though there's rules, there's still a tendency to be thinking about it, and that thinking is going to cause you to make decisions and act, and it's going to affect your functioning. So some people are just wired more restless than others. That's the Mercury-Uranus. Sometimes the Mars-Mercury is restless. It has this sharp arguing side or angry side, judgmental side, but Mercury-Uranus isn't so judgmental. It's not evasive. It's just nervous and restless. It's hard to stay focused, or it's jumping from one thing to another. It depends what sign the Mercury's in. But this nervousness, this restlessness, this unstable, always see something differently. Here's the rule for this. Oh, I don't see the rule. I can see it's different. There's something different in this. Or I got to look at it a different way. And that can be exciting to talk to someone who's always seeing things differently. But it's an effort to have to communicate clearly to someone else. Okay, so the conjunction can be really independent thinking. But even that, and it can be really genius independent thinking. Exciting. And it will express excitement well. But out of 10 people that would have it, probably 6 or 7 would have more excitement neurosis or excitement, worry, anxiety, like the restlessness around thinking and not being able to concentrate or stay at a course for a long time. They want to do things, put things together fast and move on them without taking time to really learn them. So that's the Uranus. The sextiles and the trines, or really any of the other aspects, won't have that stress factor. A person might be able to be a little innovative, or you might see with a sextile trine, they can be a little innovative, they're thinking a little differently, but it's not going to stand out that strongly. It's just not going to be a disturbance. It doesn't have the stress factor that changes the way you think all the time. Now, it can be thinking, but if the Mercury, which is your coordination system, affects your nerves and your alertness to the moment, it can affect your nervous system and have a very physical effect. So if someone has Mercury-Uranus aspect, you've got a kid that's got Mercury-Uranus conjunction square opposition, you are definitely not, even Mercury-Mars, but Mercury-Uranus especially, you're definitely not going to give them a Coke or sugar. You give them sugar, you're just setting off the bomb. You're setting off the hyperness. It's just magnifying it immediately. So then it backs up to how do you live with the moon around it. If your mind is not trying to focus on basic things, it's hard to think straight, to live properly.